Okay, I've been given a leave pass by the General, so when it's a 3-star telling you she doesn't need an intro, I'm more than happy to oblige.
Thanks, everyone. I was just helping us on time as well. So I've got a presentation to show you. There's quite a bit of information in there. Some of it is myth busting because you are our community that help recruit to the broad ADF that includes our fabulous reserve service as well as our CIRCAT 6-7. Now, the CDF apologises that he cannot be here today. However, what he has done, he has written a statement that he actually would like me to read for you. So I shall do that for him. So thank you for the invitation to join you at the Defence Reserves Association 2024 National Conference, and my sincere apologies that I am unable to attend today. Reservists form an essential component of the Australian Defence Force and have performed critical roles on major operations, exercises and training, as well as supporting the day-to-day function of defence. In recent years, domestic operations have demanded significant effort. For 3 consecutive years between 2021 and 2023, reservists made valuable contributions to ADF flood assistance for communities all across Australia, particularly in New South Wales. In 2020, reservists deployed to Operation COVID-19 Assist to support Australia's whole-of-government response to the pandemic. Their contribution saw effective measures to combat the virus and to protect the health of Australians. And during the 2019-2020 summer bushfires, approximately 4,000 reservists were deployed to Operation Bushfire Assist to provide emergency and recovery support to our affected communities. Their bravery and courage, alongside the Rural Fire Service, was commendable. Before that, the Reserve provided specialist security support to the 2018 Gold Coast Commonwealth Games, just as reservists had done previously at the Sydney Olympics in 2000. Internationally too, reservists have made vital contributions over that same period to operations in East Timor, the Solomon Islands, Iraq and Afghanistan. Those contributions over many years are all examples of the significant ability of our reserve force to respond to the mission of the day, integrate with our full-time force and apply their knowledge and their skills to support our nation. Essential to the day-to-day function of defence, there are several thousand reservists who currently work as individual augmentation, providing niche and specialist capabilities that aren't easily held within the full-time workforce. Today, there are more than 32,000 reservists under CIRCATs 3 to 5, and across the financial year 2023 to 2024, that workforce provided more than 1,200,000 days of service to defence. It is an immense contribution that is deeply appreciated by the CDF and the senior leadership and people of the Australian Defence Force more broadly. Your knowledge and skills, drawn from experiences both in and out of uniform, are a key part of the success of the Australian Defence Force and a central feature of our capability. In light of the recently released National Defence Strategy and how the services will shift, the roles of the reservists will also adapt. The Strategic Review of Reserves highlights the contemporary need to design the whole of the ADF as an integrated force and better optimise the function reservists can perform across all service categories. We will need to continue to develop partnerships across government, industry, academia, to understand and plan for how we can employ reservists in order to respond to new and emerging challenges, both at home and abroad. You have an important role to perform as part of that process, and it's critically important that Defence continues to integrate and optimise the utility specialist skills and diverse experience that our reservists provide. We are fortunate to have an incredibly capable reserve workforce able to meaningfully support our national interests. You should be very proud of the long and distinguished history of the Australian Defence Force Reserves and the contributions you have made to Australia. Thank you, and I wish you all the best for a successful and engaging national conference. So that was from the CDF personally, and he, like I said, he does apologise that he cannot be here, but he invested in that speech for me to read to you all. So you saw up earlier the scope I was going to cover. There's quite a bit in it, and I want to leave you time for questions, so I might fly through a reasonable amount of this presentation. So the previous slide was the National Defence Strategy, and I know everyone in this room has probably read it, seen it, but essentially the strategy of denial is the cornerstone of what Defence is planning. We are focusing on what does that mean from a capability and credible capability that complicates the potential adversary's decision-making process, increasing the range, lethality of the ADF, and strengthening national resilience. Now, that includes also focusing on Defence's international engagement efforts so that we are stronger together with our partners rather than by ourselves. This slide actually is the current laydown of the ADF. There's a lot of information in this slide. We recruit to over 300 different roles in the Australian Defence Force, right across all service categories in the ADF. Recruiting achievement or outcomes over the last couple of years have been tough, and you heard Minister Thistlethwaite talk to that in relation to full employment and a really tough market. That's on top of Australia coming out of a COVID pandemic where just before COVID, the Australian Defence Force was actually full. We were within 1% of our guidance. COVID happened and people stayed in the military waiting to see what happened in terms of the Australian economy or our national setting, for example. And post-COVID, everyone picked up and left. So we had 3 years of really high separation rates, highest in 20 years, essentially. So that hit right at the point, pre-COVID, where we had been planning for an expansion or a growth of the Australian Defence Force. So we had a convergence of issues hitting us, and that played out over the last 3 years, essentially. To the result, in the full-time force, we're currently just under 4,500 short of where we should be. And in the reserve force as well, in CERCAT 5, it's anywhere up to 6,000, depending on how we restructure in terms of capabilities. But there are measures that we're doing in order to address that, and I'll go into some of that shortly. But this is essentially the laydown of the ADF as it is at the moment. I have a few demographics here in relation to what our reserve looks like. This is the predominance of the age demographic. And some interesting facts. We do a census every few years for the Australian Defence Force. 35% of our reserve workforce indicate they're going to serve through to retirement. That's fantastic because it gives us a depth of strength, capability and wisdom to draw on. The median length of service, though, in the reserve, depending how we work the days, is around 5 years, which is really an interesting dynamic there. And 33% have previously served in the full-time force, either have come in and done some continuous full-time service or have come from CERCAT 7 and transferred into the reserves. But 54% are ab initio direct entry, which is fantastic. Now, the majority of that direct entry comes into Army, of course, but Air Force do have some, and Navy, as you might hear when Doug presents, are looking at some more increased numbers in direct entry. And the majority of our workforce in the CERCAT 5 to 3 workforce, predominantly 76% of our reserve force is CERCAT 5. So that means career managed in service to deliver capability for defence. Now, we look at the movement across defence. We've talked about an integrated force. I watch the movement across defence quite regularly in my role to understand how we can manage flow, how can we enable service in any manner for the ADF. And that diagram that you can see up there looks like a Batman mask. That's what I colloquially refer to it as. That is a flow diagram to look at what is happening in the force. The map of Australia gives you an indication, and this wouldn't be a shock to anyone in this room, where the majority of our reserve workforce serve in terms of its headcount. So obviously Queensland, New South Wales and ACT and Victoria are the larger areas, closely followed by, of course, WA, and then into South Australia, Northern Territory and ACT. And I think that goes to some of the workforce challenges that my colleagues were asking about what's happening in the north in industry, for example, as well. So this is an indication of reserve growth and our service categories by rank that you can see. And again, we do the census to understand patterns of service, how we can influence conditions of service based on patterns of service using a raft of data that becomes available to us. And I just wanted to show you this as well. So, the Defence Strategic Review happened and the Chief of Personnel position was created. And you don't actually create a Chief of Personnel position and have an enormous amount of disruption in a system. And over the last 12 months, that's what's been happening within Defence and a lot of concurrent activity around that. So we stood up just over a year ago now, and what that meant was Military Personnel Organisation was created. Into Military Personnel Organisation, we now have Military Personnel Division, which has recruiting right through to transition and a career management cycle team in the middle. That's a through-life career for all Australian Defence Force personnel, not just permanent, it's all, it's the integrated force. Bringing into military personnel, Joint Health Command, so we get a whole-of-life view of health for our people. Australian Defence College, professional military education and training, and a lot of more junior people who are not necessarily in this room, some may be online, will get the benefit of that because we've got now some online remote courses accessing things like Staff College that wasn't necessarily available before, helping the professional military education for our people. Also bringing in Joint Service Support Division. Now, we're really fortunate Doug's in the room, the former head of JSSD, but when MPO stood up, we broke out some elements around that were formerly in JSSD. JSSD now has a mission or a unifying factor that is support to the member, the family and the commander for a professionalised military force. So in Joint Service Support Division we have families, Defence Member and Family Support Branch, we have Defence Legal Services to help COs and our people. We have the military police, so the Provost Marshal. People say to me, how do military police support families and members? Actually, all commanders need military police to ensure we have a professionalised military force. So the military police are in there. ADF Sport, so Phil Winter and his crew are in there. When we were talking about rugby in the Pacific and PNG, we've actually crafted with Phil international sport diplomacy type engagement plan where we send out all ADF sporting teams integrated into different parts of our region associated with the sports that they play. So taking a deliberate impact effect with ADF sport in our region. The Sexual Misconduct Response or Prevention Response Office and ADF Financial Services Consumer Centre Religious Advisory Committee to the services. That's what makes up Joint Service Support Division. It's a group that comes together, and if you are reading doctrine, which I know everyone in the room reads doctrine, it has, those support services are buried in logistics doctrine for all my loggy friends in the room, but this is the first time we've had a division that will optimise to provide support services in competition and conflict, and we're working through that now. Now, I said we broke out another element, and Doug is leading that element, and he's staying here and can talk to that, but it now includes a focus on pathways to service, work experience, cadets. We have over 30,000 cadets that we support, over 4,500 adult volunteers, and a lot of our reserve depots and units right across our area, right across Australia, are actually integrated and help manage that effort. We know 16% of cadets eventually join Defence, and those are the ones that declare it. So it is a youth development program, all-inclusive, to support our people. Whether they go on to join Defence, that's irrelevant. If we can ensure through the cadet program that we're creating great citizens of Australia, that's in our interest to do. And Doug's responsible for that overarching program. We also moved into this new division, the Defence Employer Partnering Network, where we meet with, segment leaders of industry that help us work through how do we ensure our employers are releasing reservists to undertake service, how do we make it attractive for employers to employ reservists and commit to helping us, and there's some really active and great people as part of that employer partnering network that we just met with 2 weeks ago, indeed, on how we're collectively working through some big issues. And Doug, also in that team, we have the Reserve Strategic Review. Doug and Steve Meredith co-led that. It is pre-decision at the moment. The report is with government at the moment. Doug will talk through some themes, and I don't want to steal his thunder. But essentially, that is Military Personnel Division. It is the military life cycle of a career inside Defence People Group, and I work with a really fabulous Band 3, Justine Gregg, to deliver the Defence People System. Now, I've got a bit of an eye-watering chart I'll show you in a minute. But essentially, the DSR and NDS tells us to do what's on that slide, which is to create a people system to deliver contemporary workforce design, training and force generation, and that is key. So this is the eye-watering slide. We're mapping the people system across Defence in terms of who is responsible and accountable. That's what this slide shows through different tasks, and the strategic tasks that we have to do, and then how we're measuring it. We've not actually done this before. This is the more simple version, which is why I jumped onto it pretty quick. I wanted to show you it is complicated. So this indicates in terms of what we're looking at the total force. So in terms of the design, the Vice Chief, as the Joint Force Authority, is responsible for the design of the force, the planning and the prioritising of capabilities and who we recruit to and who we post to as priorities. DepSec DP, that's what I talked about, my fabulous colleague Justine Gregg, who collectively, her and I are Defence People Group. Justine provides the enterprise approach. So we all intersect with Justine's People Strategy Organisation. They're responsible for WHS systems, our pay administration systems, for example, our fabulous conditions of service document, PACMAN, that everyone loves reading, for example, and of course mental health and wellbeing branch, which is really new in any military contemporary setting, sits within People Strategy Organisation as well. So workplace effects, but, and I know that there are a number of reservists that are also public service, and what's great from the NDS and DSR is that we are now uplifting APS capability. We have over 18,000 public service in Defence, and we're now taking a capability approach to them, and there is an APS capability branch. So this is part of bringing integration more so across Defence workforce. Service chiefs and CJC are responsible for defining the work that we do in terms of job. So that's professional mastery. Train and prepare is what the service chiefs and CJC are responsible for. And Chief of Personnel or Military Personnel Organisation, I raise in terms of recruit, employ in terms of career manage, and transition in that setting. and ensure that through that whole of military career life cycle, we contribute to force generation. So I have a very distinct mission, which is essentially I have to enable my colleagues, the service chiefs and CJC, for force generation. That is our key focus, enable force generation. So this is understanding what we actually have to do and where we have to get to. The NDS talks about 69,000 by the 2030s. So it's a pretty large jump to get there, but what we have done is actually modelled the requirements. So it's based on quite a bit of science. For the full-time force, it is really 2.44 people per 1,000 Australians. So the numbers actually work, but what we didn't have were the policy settings that enabled service, because right up until pre-COVID, we were pretty full and we didn't have a growth mindset in and around how can we force generate quickly. All that is shifted, which is what we've been doing over the last 12 months. So the recruiting environment, we've all heard it's pretty competitive, and yes it is, and we only had a recruiting outcome of 66% this year. But that means over 6,000 Australians still joined the Australian Defence Force across all service categories. So 6,000 in a tough employment market, and if I talk to my civilian counterparts, is actually pretty good. 6,000 people stood up and volunteered to join the Australian Defence Force. We need to actually do better than that, and that's what we're working on at the moment. So what are we actually doing? We're doing it under these themes. So widening the aperture, and you heard about enabling permanent New Zealand residents who've lived in Australia for 1 year and not served in a military for 2 years. Deliberately put in place policy settings because we want to be stronger together with our New Zealand counterparts, and we know that perhaps some of our New Zealand military colleagues probably would have come and joined our military. But we wanted to protect our partner because we are stronger together in that. So that's what that policy setting design is for. Increasing lateral transfers. We've always had lateral transfers. We don't go and poach from other countries. Other countries don't go and poach from us. But where we get contacted from countries where people want to join, we enable that. We've traditionally had around 70 to 100 each year join. It's been a bit of a cumbersome process, but what we're doing, we have the capacity to go up to 400. That helps us in middle ranks where some of that hollowness exists. And we're expanding in terms of that 70 to 100, the numbers, with Home Affairs in order to make it go faster. And you heard Minister Thistlethwaite talk to that. There was a bit of traffic in the media that we're changing medical entry standards. We are. Some of those standards hadn't actually been reviewed for 25 years, which meant we were not enabling people to join the military who might have had dermatitis, and if you're in the military, we would keep you. We were rejecting people or having to put a bureaucratic process in place for people who had braces to get waivers. We said no to women who had menopause or had endometriosis. We were doing this on the basis of a diagnosis, not a functional assessment. So what we've done is we've looked at the 83 medical entry standards and contemporised them because our modern military medicine can treat conditions in austere environments. So that's what we've done. It's about safety, operating safety, taking an occupational view for that. So we sent 15,000 people over 5 years off to specialist appointments. Instantly, we have put financial disadvantage into joining the military because it's expensive to get that. That's gone. We now pay for that. That 15,000, 25% of people disengaged from the process because we made it too hard to join. This is this growth mindset I've talked about adjusting over the last 12 months. So we are seeing the green shoots coming through. So pre-COVID, we were down, or just on the COVID run, we were down 40,000 applications annualised to join the ADF. There are over 60,000 applications now to join the ADF. So in terms of shifting our policies and making things go faster, as in building capacity into the recruiting system. That's what we've been doing concurrently with still doing the recruiting. We've had a recruiting partner, you'll hear this play out often all over the place, since the 2000s. The first recruiting partner we had outsourced with was Manpower Group. Went out to tender, and I think it was around the 2008, so it became Chandler McLeod. Within 12 months, Chandler McLeod and the Commonwealth, through mutual agreement, terminated that contract because of our behaviours with the contractor. Went out to tender again, Manpower stepped back in and helped us. Went out to tender again. How many industry companies do you think wanted to partner with Defence at that point? Yeah, one, Manpower. And so Manpower has been our fabulous colleague in partnering up until when we've just gone out to this tender. When we went out on this last tender, we had 13 companies in an RFQ approach, 13, which was excellent. We narrowed scope and took 4 through to tender before, to take through to tender essentially. But we spent 110 hours with each of those companies risk mitigating the approach to recruiting. So we knew back in 2020 when we started the new tender approach with recruiting, we were going to have a growth for the ADF. We knew that, and we knew we couldn't recruit the same way. So we then took the 4 companies through to tender, and our current partner is Adecco Australia. They transitioned in or took operative ownership of the contract on the 1st of July 23. They had to land on Manpower's 20-year contract and adjust in flight, and that's what they've been doing. And it's true to say that the transition in hasn't gone well. There are 2 or 3 areas that haven't gone well. Psychological testing, the standards for psych testing have not changed. Let me be very clear here. The psych testing, we didn't have enough psychs building in with a new medical provider. That has remediated. So we're on track there now with the number of psychological assessments each week we actually have to do. Medical, doctors, and if you're in the community, you know doctors are difficult to get appointments with at the moment. So Sonic Health Group is the subcontractor to the Prime. They've been working extraordinarily hard to build medical capacity. As we've been doing that, I actually asked the question, the attestation. 72 hours before you join the military, you're meant to do an attestation medical. And we were trying to shift doctors into the enlistment medical that do that functional assessment, can you join piece, but we're having to put them onto the attestation medical. I said, how many people actually fail the attestation? And it was less than 1%. So science, stop, risk approach, put all the doctors onto the medical. All right, so these are build the capacity in the system. We need to do up to 600 medicals a week across Australia in order to grow. So that's underway at the moment, and I think the capacity for the medical team sits around 500. We've just trained 20 ADF doctors. Some may be in the room or online, a lot of reservists in that, so we can surge when we need to for deliberate engagements. And we've adjusted in terms of the online application. We had only 40% of people complete the actual application because we've made it so difficult. Young people today like a gamification approach. So when we're trying to recruit, not ourselves, who sometimes like pen and paper, a bit more easier digital questioning, the generations today, we're going into using a tool called Cognify, which is an industry standard tool in relation to the application to join the ADF. We've gone from 180 questions in the medical health questionnaire to 30 to then focus on the risk areas. So these are all the reforms to generate volume in the system. And when we've modelled the numbers, we know that the numbers are there. And I gave you an example of the 15,000 over 5 years. The medical changes will create an additional 2,000 to 3,000 people. So 60,000 in the pipeline. The block is on the medical capacity and the candidate management system that we're moving on to. The one we're on at the moment is 20 years old. So a lot of difficulty in generating AI in that. That's being replaced as Adecco modernise off the 20-year former contract to a new one. So I wanted to give you that to myth bust because you will hear that we're not recruiting. And we're not, but that's not to say that no reform is happening and there is the population that wants to join the ADF. Okay, it's 35% propensity to join in our demographic 17 to 35, and it's steady. It isn't dipping at this point, which is great. So there is still the interest to serve. Okay, we have the Joint Transition Authority. We provide transition services to reserves. So this is a change over the last quite a few years that we've done. Now, I'll skip over that, but there'll be more reform in transition, and I'm anticipating that from the Royal Commission. But this is the transition journey, just to give you a visual. Don't worry about the timeline at the bottom. You can see the 2012 little hexagonals. That's the type of services delivered in 2012, and the 2024 is where we're sitting at now with the type of services to help people transition from full-time or reserve service into the next phase of whatever they want to do, to help people transitioning out of CERCAT 6 and 7 to find roles in CERCAT 5 or 3 to keep providing service. Okay, I talked about being responsible for career management. These are some points in terms of management of the force in Navy. Now, we've got Tish here who can go into that in a bit more detail should we want to, but we're all looking at, as a consequence of the strategic review of reserves, how we better provide career management for the entire force, including our fabulous CERCAT 5s to 3s. The same applies to Army as well. How do we get better reserve management in terms of careers and career development as well? So we also are doing longitudinal planning with the CERCAT 5 workforce for Army in particular, given the capability that the 2nd Division is. But CERCAT 5 isn't just in the 2nd Division, it is integrated right across Army, for example. And I'm not going to go into much detail, I'm conscious of time, so I'm flicking through this component because I know there are people in the room that can answer these questions this afternoon. Same with Air Force, and we're looking at, in particular in Air Force, how can we grow a reserve force in Air Force focused in and around agile basing for Air Force, and what does that mean in a logistics modelling sense as well. Okay, a lot is now happening in relation to reaching out to people, so CERCAT 2, we just got under 10,000 in CERCAT 2 and our CERCAT 3 workforce, to where we can, in that Batman diagram, think about the flow, where we can engage to offer more opportunities in defence. I know that continuous full-time service, or ServOps-C, is a little difficult. Our fabulous reservists can actually do it, but they need a bit of notice and they need a bit of commitment from Defence in order to do that. We've just opened it up now, 1,500 positions, and you can have a full posting cycle. So you can you can actually get a posting cycle for 3 years within Defence. That gives you certainty, or our reservists certainty. It enables the employer to have certainty around another hiring mechanism, and it helps generate an ADF and how we keep bringing in and refreshing skills, both for learning for CERCAT 7, but also integrating our reserve capability. Okay, that's ServOps-C continuation or communications, and that's what I've essentially just mentioned. And so that is available for people through the career management agencies in the designed force. So we work with Military Workforce Design Division, the Joint Force Authority. Where can we do this to enable integration, enable some permanency or consistency and understanding of conditions of service, so that, like I said, we can work with our employer partnering network for that surety to engage our fabulous reservists. Okay, their value proposition. Now, there's a bit of work on this. It started off in CERCAT 7 the full-time force because of that substantial separation rate, okay, that I mentioned. That's not to say that we don't need to do work on the value proposition of reserve service. Absolutely we do. And Doug and his team have started that, but it's how do we blend it into what is the value proposition for service in the ADF, given we're meant to be integrated or moving towards integrated and designing for integrated. In this room, Minister Keogh's actually asked me to look at what does non-liability mental health care look like for all reservists, not just those that qualify at the moment in relation to domestic operations, for example. There are around 8,000 reservists at the moment that don't qualify for non-liability mental health care through DVA. So I'm working with DVA, how can we expand that? That's happening at the moment, work is underway looking at that. I'm also looking at what does it mean for ADF family health program benefits? How could I expand, if I can, to offer that to the reserve force as well? So there are things underway in terms of actual conditions of service or access to support services from a value proposition perspective that we're working on. Okay, I wanted to talk quickly about the Royal Commission. Thank you to everyone in this room if you've been a witness or engaged with the commissioners. When you have a generational Royal Commission, you don't lean away from it, you lean into it, because from my view, if we can find something from this Royal Commission that helps us, it will help Australia in terms of what is a national tragedy being suicide. So we've provided 192,000 documents to the Royal Commission, which is over 3 million pages of information. That's leaning into a Royal Commission because we all want recommendations that we can implement that will make a difference on this particular issue. There are the themes. So the report will be handed to the Governor-General on the 9th of September. So we will have that report, and that will dominate for the back end of the year how we implement recommendations that we are given. And the themes, this is our assessment of the themes that are likely to come up, and they will be, if you've been following the Royal Commission, they will not be of a shock to anyone. And if you looked at what I'm responsible for through the Military Personnel Organisation, it will not be a shock to you that I've got a big back end of the year coming up in terms of implementing not only the National Defence Strategy, changing how we do recruiting, but implementing a better environment through Royal Commission recommendations for our people. And I need everyone's help to do that. No one is the owner of all the good ideas. I need everyone's help to lean into this. And now, the ADF strategic review of the reserves. I was fortunate that I worked with Doug over the last year or so on this review of the reserves. And Steve Meredith was the co-lead. I'm not going to steal Doug's thunder, but I just want to remind everyone this is actually pre-decisional. So Doug will give you an insight into themes. What I can tell you is any outcome from the review of the reserves will be brought into the strategic workforce plan so that it comes in an integrated way into the whole of force. These are the principles that we looked at the reserve review in to enable service, and the whole theme that you would have heard me talk about, how do I enable service? How do we enable people who volunteer to join the ADF in whatever service category? So this is what the reserve review looked at. It does make mention of conditions of service in there, and we will be looking at that in a full total workforce spectrum. And that's been a constant theme that's come up, and I've given you insights into a couple of support services. Now, I've mentioned a few things. These are the priorities that we're working on throughout 24-25 financial year. People in the room know we have a contained budget, and it's how do we do a best effect for our people within that budget, and I'm looking at the latitude around that. and Doug is intimate in my team for how we do that moving forward. And that's the value now that I've actually got a dedicated position, like I said, pathways to service, enabling service. That's Doug's focus, and he brings that into a big conversation that we have around design and management of people. So I think that was a quick canter through to bring you back on time and make sure we hit Paul's ceremony. Yeah. I unfortunately cannot stay. Mick knows I've had a death in my family, and I'm leaving after morning tea to head to Tasmania for a family funeral. But I absolutely wanted to be here to provide this message to the Reserve Association because you are critical to how we generate a force. Your opinion and advice matters, and I actually wanted to be here to help myth bust and let you know what's happening, but to assure you that it is the reserve force is a priority from my perspective. We cannot be an ADF without it. So thank you.
Thank you, General. We're very appreciative of your time and our condolences, given all the circumstances to be here, and we're very appreciative as well of the message from Chief of Defence Force. I know Paul will give me a signal when we're at the last safe moment to go upstairs for the remembrance ceremony, but in the meantime, if there are some questions for General Fox, and I do have one online straight away, so I might just ask that one. It's mentioned that reserves bring specialist skills and are essential for the future. The current reserve pay system is not contemporary, so this is the divisor question around the number of days in the year and how someone's reserve remuneration is calculated accordingly.
Oh, but no, it's part two.
Oh, and yet, hang on, the question goes on. It explains fully that the fact that reserves can only work a maximum of 220. I'm not suggesting change the denominator to 220, but a change has to occur. Particularly, they stress reserves with strong skills in needed areas such as project management, ILS, cyber, engineering. We'd add, of course, other well-known categories such as logistics and medical, etc. Yeah.
It is a great question. So everyone in this room, I'm looking, will know we were on ADF pay for 20 years. That was our old system. That was a pay for skills type model. And then we went in the 2008s to what we're currently on, graded officer pay scale, graded other ranks pay scale. That was a more an egalitarian system. And where we find ourselves now in 2024 is we need a hybrid model. That's for the whole force, not necessarily focusing on the divisor, but we are working what is the whole of force industrial scale that we need for the force of the future. And we need to do that now with some urgency because we don't want to be on a pay system for 20 plus years that isn't about a focused force looking at the skills we need. So that is in the wind at the moment in terms of how do we do that. I talked about the concurrency of reform we're doing. We don't want to break the people that help the people, so to speak, with all of the reform work. So it's about when do we sequence it. But from my perspective, it's a bit of an urgent body of industrial relations work we actually have to do. And I would be doing that with my colleague, Justine Gregg.
And I think in broad terms, the DRA's position there is people need choices, not a binary outcome. So depending upon whether you're moving from permanent service to part-time service or whether you are someone who's always served in the reserve or at what stage of life you are at, you need some choices around the portability of super, around remuneration and a range of other matters that all go towards optimising your capacity to serve. So that's, we're taking a broad church view of this, I think, if we possibly can. Another question, if there are. Yes.
A specific question and another specific question. I've heard that the defence facilities at Keswick and Adelaide's been sold. How do we sell a major reserve base in the middle of a major city and then say that we're supporting the reserves? The next question is, I recently went to a military medical reserve presentation via the internet, and the speaker was an Air Force Reserve doctor who said, I got into the reserve in 3 months and my husband took a whole year to get into the Army Reserve Medical Service. How long is it really taking to get a doctor into the military medical service?
Really good questions. In terms of recruiting, that I'll go to your last question first. In terms of recruiting, I talked about backlog in medical. So at the moment, warts and all, application to letter of offer, 350 days. Okay, it's way too long, but that's on average, warts and all, where a candidate might not talk to recruiting for 3 months. Now, I understand young people in that journey. I have a secret shopper. My son is actually going through the recruiting process at the moment, and he frustrates the living daylights out of me because he's blowing out those numbers. Some people can join within 53 days. That's the fastest I'm tracking at the moment. But that depends if the candidate is ready. So we have to actually do criminal history checks, the medical check, and some of those security checks take a bit longer, and we don't have ownership of that process. Some people who walk in with all documentation or their personal life perhaps in order come through much quicker. I know by role how long it takes, and we can bring people in much quicker. It depends on how they're going to be employed. So I dare say the 3-month one probably is a specialist capability officer that may not be deployed in the first instance. And so we're looking at how can we generate accelerated recruiting. And in fact, I'm about to work with 13 Brigade in relation to how can we bring reservists in much quicker through minimal checks, with more checks happening in service, because we may not deploy them as quick, or we may have more degrees of ability to do those checks through the reserve unit. So that's a trial we're doing that will address some of those problems. To get quicker, we have to go quicker. The commercial says, my commercial contract with Adecco is 100 days, but the National Defence Strategy doesn't have me at 100 days, it has me much less, and that's what we're working on to go faster. So when I get the relevant parts of the system in order, so then there's a few things that got to happen, we will go much faster. The green shoots are there, it's just got to connect.
We have got time for one more. No, we need to move. Despite my best efforts, we're being moved to, so Paul.